Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Words on Whisky, 1st of July 2020. You're all very welcome. I have a very special guest this evening. So we're honoured to be having Charles MacLean as our guest this week. So should be a great show. Just starting off, I suppose, as normal with the weekly news. So a relatively quiet week. The biggest news, of course, is the opening of the bars after COVID-19 is relaxing. So a large amount of the bars are opening. There are restrictions. Let's get out there and support them, and let's be responsible and keep our distance from people. The other news then is there is a new release, and we have a new release from James Fox's, and what they brought out a single grain 13-year-old cask strength single cask whiskey, which they have produced in partnership with Cullen. So I think that'll be very interesting, and it's I think €140, 13-year-old single grain. We've got to try it. It's an extremely rich, flavoursome whiskey. I don't know if you've tried the 10-year-old, but this adds legs to that. Other than that, a relatively quiet week, and I think we'll just jump straight into welcoming our guests, and let's see if Charles is there. So,
it's always
Charlie, hello,
a
welcome.
moment of terror that yeah. Hi everybody. Yeah.
No, we both scrubbed up well since we spoke this afternoon, I think. You're very welcome on the show. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
For those of you that don't know Charlie, Charlie is probably one of the most prominent figures in Scotch whiskey. He's a multi-award-winning writer, fantastic taster. He's a member of a master of the quiche. I forgot he was a keeper initially and then made a master. So many titles amongst you, Charles. And of course, you've been to our shores a few times, and of course, we'd love to have you back over again. And so, tell us, how have you been keeping during this lockdown period, and what have you been up to?
I've been writing books. I've written 4 books, as a matter of fact. The first one was I was commissioned at the beginning of last year to write a book with the unpromising title, or rather the meretricious title of A History of Whisky in 100 Objects, which embraces Ireland, by the way, and America, so on. Based obviously on that book by Neil MacGregor, A History of the World in 100 Objects. Neil was the director of the British Museum, and so he was his objects were obviously in the museum collection. Well, difficult to find objects to display and chronologically tell the story of whiskey. So my brief was extended to include people, places, events to a degree, but principally trying to get an object, because each essay was had an illustration. I haven't seen the illustrations, of course, yet, but so anyway, I was traveling so much last year that to let you know, but to the back end of the year, between August, 1st of August, September, October, and the end of October, it was 92 days, and I was able to spend only 20 nights in my own bed. I mean, I was traveling an awful lot. And so I tried to get out of the job. I hadn't done anything about it. But the publisher said, come on. I said, get somebody else to do it, for goodness sake. And particularly Gavin Smith, who has written for you. Yes. Very good writer, very good fellow. And someone who I esteem as a writer, and I like it very much as a friend. And why not get Gavin to do it? He can do it standing on his head. Oh no, we want you to do it. But I tell you what, they said, would you work with Gavin? and we'll give you another year to produce the text. And I said, well, that's a great, so that's fine. And then, of course, so I started on it after the new year, and then came this lockdown. And so Gavin and I have finished about 6 months ahead of schedule of delivery, 80,000 words, I'd say. And so that's, and I love historical research. And so to spend the days, at least the mornings, ferreting around trying to find. You can see all these books behind me. These are the tools of my trade. I don't need to go to a library to find the information I require.
They're all whiskey books, are they?
These are all whiskey books. Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah. This part of the house I'm in my so-called tasting room, and
of course, you're in Edinburgh at the moment, are you?
I'm in Edinburgh. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So then an American publisher got in touch and said, "Look, can we're using a book that I wrote 25 years ago called Malt Whisky, and that was a set text for a course that they're doing, a diploma that they're doing on whiskey, and my book is the set text for the malt whiskey segment, and so we can't get copies. We can't get copies. It's out of print." Right. And I said, "Well, the copyright's mine, so." But I'll have to have a look at it to see, whether there are any howlers. In 25 years, I was, I know a lot more about whiskey now than I did then, and and I also had to update it. So that was number two, and then by chance I had two commissions to write books to accompany the eye-wateringly expensive bottles. One was it was a Glen Grant 1948, and the other was Karazawa.
Right.
And so I've been kept busy, and also I do a lot of tasting for Diageo for their casks of distinction.
Yes.
Casks of distinction program, and I write tasting notes on that. I've got a couple of them in front of me. Lagavulin.
Well, actually, I've got in your honor, I've got a couple of whiskies here, Irish ones, I'm afraid, but I might be able to persuade you to try these at some point. But I have a single malt peated. They're both relatively young, and I have a Bill Phil peated. So I poured myself a Hinch one to start with. So, Sláinte. Hopefully you'll join me in something interesting. I don't know what you have in your glass.
At the moment, I've got a glass of blended Scotch, but I'll pour a more interesting one. I've got a sample bottle. Oh God, I can't see.
Left to right and right. Yes.
Yeah, a Mortlach 1990.
Wow. Okay.
Which I've written tasting notes on. It's a single cask. But I can't remember what it is. But I'm a great fan of Mortlach. I'm sure that many of your readers, many of your viewers.
Silent distillery now, isn't it?
No. Mortlach is still in full operation.
Still producing in large. Yeah.
And indeed, Diageo were planning to double capacity. I suppose it must be now 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And then they suddenly got cold feet. They literally were going to replicate the distillery on the same site and have pipes going through to the filling store.
Yes.
So it was to produce it's a very, very complex distillation system they've got at Mortlach, completely unique. And it produces a very heavy style of spirit. But they knocked that on the head. They suddenly got cold feet. I suppose it must have been about 3 years ago. It's still. I mean, they had the architect's drawings and the whole thing, but it's on hold anyway at the moment.
Okay.
Anyway, Sláinte.
Sláinte.
Oh,
so
lovely.
I mean, you started off as a writer, and what was your background before you became into writing? You grew up in Edinburgh. You studied in Edinburgh, or?
Well, yeah, no. I was born in Glasgow, as a matter of fact, but then I'm brought up very largely on the Isle of Arran, not Irish Arran, but the Scottish Arran.
Yes, yeah.
But And then I was at school in Edinburgh. I went to St Andrews University, first of all, where I did a degree in art history and divinity, as a matter of fact. I
Okay.
never had any aspirations to be a clergyman, but it was a, dare I say it was a sort of backdoor entry to St Andrews, because I didn't have sufficient grades to get clean into to study English and philosophy, which is what I wanted to do. But anyway, and then when I finished that, I went to Dundee University and did a law degree.
Okay.
I then went to Edinburgh University and did a year here, and then this would be, so we're now 76, and I did a year in Edinburgh University to tidy up my Dundee degree, and then did my articles to become a solicitor, which was a 2-year course, but working in practice. And of course, by the time I'd finished that, or halfway through, in fact, a year in, I knew that the law was not for me, and tried to seek a way out. And I'd always been very interested in books and writing and so on.
Yeah.
And so the upshot was that I set up a literary agency called MacLean Dubois, and then very soon after I'd finally qualified, an author turned up who we thought would, save the day, float the company. Didn't, of course. And so, but anyway, that gave me the excuse to get out of the law, and tell my father that I was abandoning the law. But don't worry, Dad. Anyway, it didn't float the company. I starved.
Okay.
And then I used my art historical degree to manage for a year or so part-time a couple of galleries in Edinburgh. And then the day was saved when I went into partnership with a guy. And the day was actually saved by my cousin, who had worked in advertising in London,
right,
for all his career. And he came to Edinburgh as an account manager, account director to a very, very creative advertising agency. And they unusually didn't have a copywriter. The owner of the agency was an art director who was a brilliant, very, very talented advertising man. And so my business partner at that time and I became the other side of the creative partnership, so we became his copywriters. And this would be in 79, I would think. So that was what launched me into the writing, through advertising copywriting. And then Simon, my partner, he was brilliant on above the line advertising, television advertisements, commercials, headlines, strap lines, this sort of stuff. And I was more pedestrian and more what they call below the line, and so writing brochures and things like that. Yeah. He went on to become Scotland's leading sort of advertising guru. Anyway, I plodded on, and I wrote my first job for a whiskey company in 1981, and through the 80s, purely by chance, wrote a lot of stuff for many whiskey brands and companies. Annual reports, corporate brochures, brand brochures, this sort of stuff. And by this time, I always like to have a little book on the back burner to turn to when the commercial work was not was a bit slack,
Yes.
And so come 88, and I'd written, several of them published in Belfast, as a matter of fact. Little book, the one that you mentioned.
I have a selection of your books here that you have published. Let's see.
But he said it was in French.
Oh yes, the one about the toasts I found in French. But I think the Whiskey Pocket Guide was your first, was it?
The wee one, the wee pocket book.
Yes.
I mean pocket book, but it's encyclopedic. The print, you need to have a magnifying glass to read it, and and so it's like a little encyclopedia. Both malt whiskey and blended Scotch whiskey embraced by it for Mitchell Beasley Pocket Guide. I don't recognize that.
Wow.
that cover, as a matter of fact.
There are two covers I came across. One actually said Pocket Malt Whiskey Book.
Yeah,
And
that was the original.
yeah, so I think this is the first one, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
Well,
But I
that's
mean,
very interesting.
I found your name on at least 15 books, some of them talking about clans and tartan. So
Aye,
that's
that's right.
obviously another area you're interested in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that was in the early days before whiskey. Clans and tartans, castles, fishing villages on the east coast of Scotland. A book with an unpromising title, Get to Know the Forests of Northern England.
Okay.
I mean, words for cash, man. Words for cash. And
Right.
but it was something to turn to.
Yeah.
But in '88, I had I'd become very interested in Scotch whiskey. Particularly, my two key areas are history of Scotch and sensory evaluation.
Yes.
And we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that sensory. Well, this is gorgeous. In a moment, but so come '88, I didn't have a book on the back burner, but I had sufficient interest in the subject. And some of the jobs that I'd done had required a fair amount of historical research,
Sure.
but also had a sufficient track record to make a fist of a proposal to a publisher for a book about Scotch. And Mitchell Beasley, the wee one that you pointed out,
Yes.
they took it up. So that was contracted in '88, published in '93. And that effectively changed my life, because and then in '92, no, it must have been '93. Soon after the book had been published, I was invited to go on a course with the lovely title. This was run by what's now the Scotch Whisky Research Institute,
Yes.
which is now
The
Harriet
sensory
Watt
school.
University. Yeah. But previously it was called Pentland's Scotch Whisky Research, and they ran this. It was very much for the trade. There were 6 people on the course, and Peter, hi there, great.
Our friend Peter White, who's dragged you over here on a few occasions.
Yes, he has. What joy!
Yeah.
Great fun. Anyway, so what was I saying? Oh yeah. And so it was a week-long course, 6 people, all from the trade. There were distillery managers, there was a marketing director, blah, blah, blah. And it was an in-depth course in organoleptic assessment. The course was called The Sensory Evaluation of Potable Spirits. And my goodness, I mean, it absolutely changed my life. I had to rewrite all the tasting notes for that wee book that you pointed out. And so after that it was whiskey, and actually I've now written 18 books about Scotch.
You're
and
wow.
And I mean, I don't even count the wee books that I mentioned earlier on.
Well, you're a managing editor as well, so you have managed edited on a number of books, including World Whiskey books as well.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. I just
can't. I don't count those. 20.
I don't. Well, probably I don't think I count those in my 18.
Yeah.
And then I was the first editor of Whisky magazine.
Yes.
When it was launched in '97, I think the Whisky magazine.
Very good.
And they came to me, the guys with the idea, the publishers, and then I opened up my address book and carted them around when they were testing the water to see whether the industry would support, i.e., buy ads.
Yes.
And they'd put a pretty slick kind of computer, display presentation, and anyway, they raised the wind, and so we got it going, and then.
But you're also involved in Whiskeria magazine, isn't it?
Well, that's more current. Whiskeria is the organ of the whiskey shop. Do you have any of these whiskey shops in Ireland?
Called the Whiskey Shop.
Just called the Whiskey Shop. They've got.
No, I've seen them in England, all right, but they don't exist here.
And they've got one in Paris, I know.
Yeah.
But I think they've got about 40 or something in England, and
Yeah,
and a couple in Scotland.
a couple in Scotland
Anyway,
as
they
well.
produce a very nice magazine actually, and
It's a beautiful magazine, actually. I've seen it. Yeah, beautifully
yeah,
produced. So
but and that's it's a quarterly, and
yeah,
the and I'm lucky enough to be invited to write. So they have a thing called new releases. I don't know if they really are new releases, but they send me a list of usually about 25 whiskies to review.
okay,
And I write tasting notes on them, and then write an essay of about 300 words on each one. And so
okay.
it's that's
Well, that's a
a
lot of
very
work.
it's a pleasurable
Yes, yeah,
task every four times a year. It keeps
yeah.
the wolf from the door because you don't
Of
make money
course,
from books. I can tell you, as you know,
of course.
Sergius.
Are you missing the travel?
No, man.
No, no, you've had enough. You know, one of the things you
I,
mentioned there was the obviously congratulations on your three sons who did the transatlantic trip and avoided COVID that way. It was an extreme measure, but I believe they're just back home and they've
yeah,
broken a few records and raised some money for charity,
yeah,
125,000, I'd say. So that's
250,000.
wow, wow. So
Well, they're coming close to 250,000. Oh gosh, they come up with this idea at the beginning of last year. Dad, we're planning to row the Atlantic. Well, the youngest one
there's their site
and
there.
the middle boy. Oh, there they are. Oh,
Yes, you
splendid.
recognize them, which is great.
Yeah, they do. When they're great music. They're great musicians. Piper,
Okay.
accordion, and guitar. And this is where my wife's family have a wee croft house way up in the far northwest in Sutherland. There they are. Gosh, and and so that's where we always spend our summer holidays there. And this is them coming into Antigua. The boat was sponsored. The boat was called Braw,
Yes.
but here they are. And Jamie, he's a great piper, you see, and and he had these flares blazing out of his chanters, out of his drones.
Yeah. And they didn't
But
fall out.
and there we are. There we are. First three brothers to row any ocean, youngest trio to row the Atlantic Ocean, and the fastest trio ever by 6 days. By 6 days
Amazing.
to row the Atlantic Ocean.
Well,
Quite an
congratulations
achievement.
to them. It's a great achievement. And if anybody wants to see the website and maybe contribute, it's broer.co.uk. So
Well, it'd be lovely if you contributed, but look at the website. I tell you what,
it's
there are
beautiful.
2 films, and there will be more films coming up. But there's the first film, which you can find on the website, which is called The First Wave, which is the kind of introductory one. And then there's one that will appeal to some of your viewers just now, called The Great Whisky Pillage.
Right.
And
Okay.
and which is hilarious. It's
I must have a look at that
absolutely
one.
hilarious. They're very, very short little films,
Yeah.
beautifully shot by friends of the boys, you know.
Yeah.
And
It's a beautiful
with
website, actually. The photography is fantastic. And the causes are
oh,
great as well. So, I mean,
yeah, that's great.
children first and Feedback Madagascar.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
$250,000 for them. Congratulations to them for doing that. You must be very
Well,
proud.
yeah. Well, that's really kind of you to mention but watch that site because they're away at the moment. They're finishing off a little film which will be about the blending because they did this trip up the west coast of Scotland. And I spoke to my friends in the industry and all the distilleries on the west coast,
Yes.
and all of them contributed. Some of them contributed sort of 30 bottles of malt whiskey, and which then I've blended into
nice.
Some into a blended malt and some into a blend with grain whiskey from Girvan Distillery in Ayrshire.
Yeah.
And anyway, so they're making a film about that. Their chums,
Yeah.
and which they're doing as we speak. They're finishing off that film, and so that will go onto the site. I'm not sure exactly when, but in the next week or so.
Oh,
But
fantastic. Keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
I do because they do a very good job. The Wee Film Company. Yeah.
I know if I spent more than a week with my two brothers, we probably it wouldn't be a wave that killed us. It would be something else. But it's amazing that they haven't fallen out. So, um, just quickly, I've got one question in here from Michael, and his question is essentially: do you see or do Scottish distilleries see Irish whiskey as a threat? And
No.
is Scottish whiskey growing at the same level? I don't think it's growing at the same level, but it's considerably larger.
The answer is that the Scotch whisky industry takes a rather arrogant position,
Right.
because until quite recently, until the burgeoning of what we call non-Scotch broadly,
Yes.
the Scotch sold four times as much as all the other non-Scotch put together, including
Yes.
bourbon and Irish. And now that landscape is changing.
Sure.
But I think that the Scotch whisky industry, well, I know actually that it's very generous with its information and its support of non-Scotch.
Right.
So at the moment, I don't think that. Well, I know that it's not considered the sorry, just to use this broad expression, non-Scotch.
Right.
That's not seen to be a threat, although it's going to steal market because whiskey drinkers are pluralist.
Yeah.
They will explore. So in effect, Irish can benefit from Scotch exposure, and both can benefit from the success of Japanese whiskey, for example.
Sure.
And then some of the less Swedish, French, whatever. The consumers they'll try it. They'll try it once.
Yeah.
Well, we won't talk about the potential difficulties of will they come back with all the quantity of whiskey and the brands of whiskey available? Will the consumers come back and buy the second bottle?
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's the second bottle. That's. But I mean, last year there was an increase. I think it was almost 5 billion in sales last year in Scotch. So I think it was about.
I believe so.
A 6% increase on
previous
years. But this tariff, the 25% tariff in the US, is that likely to be a significant threat?
The US is, of course, a crucial market for Irish whiskey.
Yes.
And it is currently by volume.
But I mean, Asia and the Far East are really where Scotch are growing.
Strong. But I think that the thing is that I don't think this tariff will last, to be honest. I mean, President Trump has come up with all sorts of wacky schemes, and this is one of them. But it's damaging the sales of bourbon because, of course, Europe immediately puts in equivalent tariffs, and so the bourbon makers are grumbling, and so I mean I think it's one of these madcap schemes that the isolationist America, which will be changed, and when the presidency changed, certainly. But even before, even if he's re-elected, it doesn't make commercial sense, and he won't listen to commercial reason. But the pressure will come from his own people, from the American distillers. So I think that tariff, but I'm delighted that Irish is going to. Well, we're both going to be fighting hard against the burgeoning American. And there's about 1,000 licenses were taken out last year in America.
Oh, in the States, it's a huge. And rye, of course, is becoming huge there.
And I mean, mainly very, very small. I mean, these are some of them are malt whiskey distilleries. Some of them are making bourbon and rye, straight bourbon, straight rye.
Yes.
So and most of them are very, very small units.
Sure.
By contrast, I wrote an article for a French magazine, some couple of years ago, and at that time, and I tried to update it. In that, since 2004, I reckon that 37 new distilleries have opened, and a further. Well, of course, it changes all the time, but another 30 odd are proposed. I mean, there's been a similar, not quite to the same extent, but a similar vast expansion in Ireland.
From a low base, of course, yeah. So
from a very low base.
We're at 31 at the moment.
31 from 3.
Yeah, yeah. With I don't know how many more planned, but many more planned. So keeping track of them is actually difficult.
In terms of Scotch, that has, by my sort of back of an envelope calculation, had increased the capacity, the amount of spirit that the industry can. And this is, then you have to add in, apart from the new distilleries, some of which are, have 2 million litres pure alcohol per annum capacity. Some of them are, most of them I should think are about 200,000, 100,000 to 200,000 litres. And so they're, like in Ireland, they're relatively small. But then there's these vast expansions, Macallan, Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, Glenmorangie, some of them doubling capacity, so we're significantly increasing capacity. And then some of the other smaller distilleries, etc. I reckoned, and I really should go back and have a look at it again, that the capacity has increased by 60% since 2004. Now, the question is, the million-dollar question is, will demand increase by 60%?
Yeah. There's a lot of people made a lot of investments on that. So.
Well, that's right. And the bean counters, they say, yep, keep going. But the history of Scotch whiskey and indeed Irish whiskey is such that it's booms and busts. There was a terrific crash during the 1890s. In Scotch terms, there was a vast expansion. It was, investing in Scotch whiskey distilleries was gold plated. It was absolutely blue chip. And then,
well, that coincides with our slowdown as well. Pretty much between 1890 and 1920 or so, that's when Irish whiskey lost its edge, if you like.
And that was to some extent to do with the whiskies that were being made in Scotland, because Irish whiskey, as you know, sold much bigger quantities.
Yes.
Certainly, even in the 1890s, there was more Irish whiskey sold in Scotland than, or let's say, certainly in the UK than Scotch, because it was regarded as being much more reliable. It was more consistent.
Scotch was more premium at the time. I think it was regarded,
And indeed, a lot of some, not a lot, but some Scotch, mainly grain whiskey distilleries, made a spirit which was called Irish, and they sold it as Irish, and they could sell it as Irish. They didn't have any regulations in that regard. But so you're absolutely right. But I'm surprised. I didn't know that was when Irish whiskey started to decline, because it was really more sort of after the First World War, wasn't it? The 1920s and so on.
Well, that's when it really started to take in the nosedive. But I think, from about the 1910 on, it started to take a bit of a dip. Largely because, the quality was slipping as well. But I mean, there were the other factors as well. The column still being only one of them, and then trade wars with the UK. But then when
the imperial markets, the UK and imperial markets closed, that was disastrous.
Those markets were very big markets for Irish whiskey. To find Irish whiskey in India and New Zealand, Australia was not uncommon. So,
why? Can you tell me, just or one of your listeners, the why was it that the American market for Scotch was developed covertly during Prohibition?
Yeah, and a
And
lot of it
when
came through Canada.
Canada, Mexico, but Bahamas and Saint Pierre and Miquelon, so offlying islands and offlying countries,
Yeah.
and they had a secret, what was known as the secret agreement, as you may know this, that the leading whiskey companies banded together and said, look, because they very quickly realized that demand for Scotch or good whiskey was not diminished, and so they thought, well, look, we can export perfectly legally to these offlying countries or islands, Bahamas, etc. And then after that, they closed their eyes as to what happened and how it was got into the prohibited country. But the secret agreement, which was actually led by it's so secret that not the history of it's not actually known the detail, but I think it was certainly pioneered by the distillers company, the DCL, now Diageo, the biggest distiller. But one of the key things, don't sell them shit, sell them good whiskey, at a reasonable price, and don't deal with the mob as far as possible,
Right. Okay.
And so they managed to get this quality product into the speakeasies on the eastern and western seaboard as well. Sort of bootlegged in, but exported perfectly legally. And of course then when you see the bourbon makers, they were completely, so you got the bathtub gin and all that sort of stuff. They were under grave constraints to when they were making their own whiskey, because they were being busted all the time. And so the bourbon was hopeless, the gin was shite, hence cocktails and so on. But the Scotch whiskey, which kept afloat. But why did the Irish not follow on that example?
That's a good question.
Was it because of Irish influences in the American government? Because the American government was pressing the British government to curb this this flow, which they considered to be well, you see, it was legal, but they considered it to be breaching, the idea of prohibition. But the Irish government, they played ball. Now, and they didn't subscribe to this, you see, and so they lost whatever market they had.
But also, Scotch went under the disguise of being Irish in some cases as well.
Well, I don't know
just Scotch.
I don't know whether it was that. I don't know that for a fact. Actually, it certainly went. There was one little loophole that went under medicinal, and some whiskies were managed to get through because they were labelled as for medicine, and that was legal. But the bulk of it was just bootlegged in, And it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if some Scotch was disguised or labelled as Irish.
Well, as Michael says, the bootleggers were labelling their own make as being Irish whiskey.
That's what it would
of course,
be.
the quality and the perception of Irish whiskey went really downhill. So that's something.
because it was Scotch and Irish.
Great.
Great.
So I mean, I know that obviously Scotch whiskey is very strongly protected worldwide now, and Irish whiskey is the same. It's got its geographical indication now. How do you feel about what the Scotch Malt Whisky Society has done for Scotch, and what can we learn here from what they've done?
The Scotch Malt Whisky Society, or the Scotch Whisky Association?
Sorry, so the Scotch Whisky Association, I beg your pardon.
Well, the Scotch Whisky Association has done a fantastic job. It's much criticised for the tightness of the regulations.
Yes.
But the tightness of the regulations, and you have to remember that the SWA actually is the agent for their members, i.e. all the whiskey companies who are signed up to it, which means pretty well all of them. And so they react to, well, but of course they're driven by Diageo and Pernod Ricard because they're the biggest players, and but they do a great job in terms of policing, but in terms of legislation, they have been criticised because it's a very, very tight definition, and if you look at some of these horrible American confections which add, honey and things, which are hugely popular, by the way.
Yes,
and the Americans have a very sweet tooth, and so a lot of distillers would say, "Hey, why can't we do that? Why can't we do sort of?" Well, I mean, it's a bit like, and I think that the definition could be relaxed a little bit to call it liqueur, like it's like Drambuie, Drambuie, which is still allowed, but it's a well-established brand, and indeed the name in Drambuie's case is okay, is passed, and that's so they call it liqueur Scotch or something, whatever it is, and that adds honey and so on, or sugar and whatever. So I think there is room for a little bit of relaxation, but by and large, the reason for all this tight legislation, the most legislated, and as you rightly say, Ireland follows Scotland in its definition, and
almost exactly.
Yeah, but that preserves the integrity and therefore the reputation of Scotch and Irish whiskey. So by and large, I come down in favour of. Well, I'd like to see a little bit of relaxation here and there, but but by and large, I wouldn't want. I mean, look at Japan. I mean, Japan can import sort of bourbon, Scotch. I don't know if they import much Irish whiskey. I'm sure they will do. They will do now. They will do.
Yeah, a new market.
Increase. Yeah. And they can bottle it up. I'm not sure they even need to add any Japanese whiskey, but maybe 10%.
Yes.
But if it's bottled in Japan, it could be called Japanese whiskey.
Yeah, I saw an article, I think, in one of the big news spreads criticizing the quality of Japanese whiskey because of that very reason.
Well, there we are.
That they could import brilliant whiskey as well and pass it on.
But you see, it's not truly Japanese whiskey, and so they're shooting themselves in the foot, because you see, if they're importing and then selling it as Japanese whiskey when it's not actually it's poor quality Scotch, bourbon, Irish, whatever. It's not Japanese whiskey at all, but it's labelled as Japanese whiskey.
Yeah.
And some of these brands that I've never heard of. I mean, there's been a burgeoning of distilleries in Japan as well, like in Scotland and Ireland. But Japanese whiskey is the true Japanese whiskey is a very, very fine product, modeled closely on Scotch because the Scotch production, and they make a very good product. Mm-hmm. But one of the reasons why the Japanese is so popular at the moment is down to shortage, because with the global increase in demand for whiskey, and lo and behold, in some of these Japanese whiskies, like that one I mentioned, Karazawa, that I was writing about.
I think that's a Polish-owned company now that controls the distribution of that whiskey. As far as
it's owned by a dear friend of mine, Martin Miller, who is a Pole, but it was called First Drinks, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
And the guy that ran the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in Japan, they managed to buy all the remaining stock from Karazawa, and in about 2006, I would think, and it's an amazing whiskey, and the distillery was demolished in 2000, and but they had a bit of stock, and it was bought by Kirin, the great brewers in Japan, and they had numerous, including from Marchen and this chap David, what was his name? David Kroll, to buy it and bring it back into production, but they wouldn't sell it. And so but anyway, they got the remaining stock, and of course that
very well out of it.
Yeah, they certainly are. Yeah.
Well, look, going back, one of the things, obviously, writing was your first love, but a lot of your writing is around tasting now. So perhaps you may pass on some of your wisdom and experience to those of us less versed in that skill as to
I'm sure.
well,
So
one, how to improve, and secondly, what to look out for if there's any good tips for us to improve our tasting skills.
I'm sure I don't need to teach my grandmother to suck eggs. I'm sure that your viewers, your readers, know about that. But I'll talk you through it. The first thing, the first thing is that the first thing is to remember that flavor is a combination of smell, taste, and texture.
Right.
It's not just taste. We tend to think, oh, it's got nice flavor, just taste, it's the and in relation to evaluating, appreciating whiskey, you have to take account of this.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say, and I would urge this, that whiskey is to be enjoyed as you choose. So, I've been drinking out of this tumbler glass with water, and frankly, enjoy whiskey as you like. I'm not a great fan of adding. Well, American whiskey goes very well with Coca-Cola, by the way.
Okay.
And whiskey, generally speaking, ginger ale is a nice mixture. Soda water took off. Suntory in Japan. The Japs drink. They tend to drink whiskey quite dilute, and they call it mitsuwari, and they add quite a lot of water, and and then Centauri, about 5 years ago, I think, they introduced what they called the Centauri Highball.
Yes, we've seen it
Whiskey
arrive
and soda.
here. Yeah.
Whiskey and soda, which all are, grandfathers and indeed sometimes fathers, but going back, from the 1890s, Scotch whiskey, blended Scotch, and I'm sure that Irish whiskey, the standard drink was whiskey and soda. And soda. And so they just sort of refound that. And Centauri's shot up that. So enjoy it as with ice, without ice, blah, 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 whatever you like. For appreciation, there are two simple guides. First, the glass. The glass, a white wine glass is fine. This is called a spirits nosing glass. It's the wrong way around. Well, you'll be familiar with it.
I have one of those here from last week. Yeah.
There we are. Well done. The Glencairn glass.
That's my go-to.
There we are. Glencairn. That's global standard now. It's a great glass, and it's a robust. These are the traditional sort of Copita style blenders use these, and they still do actually. That's the first tip. Second tip is use of water. Water will bring up the aroma. The reason for this sort of glass, a white wine glass is fine. A tumbler is hopeless, because you want something that will concentrate the aroma, because you smell before you taste.
Yeah.
Simple. And so now where's my water? And so now I'm just rinsing this glass.
I don't have access to water here. I don't know what to do.
Oh, well, you can manage, I'm sure. You can manage.
I'm sure I'll do my best.
So the glassware is fundamental for appreciation. And what we're talking about is appreciation,
Yes.
Partially called sensory evaluation.
Yeah.
Now, what I've got here, I've got where are we? Oh, God.
Cast of Distinction, Brora, 1978. Okay, very
So
nice.
we'll give this. Actually, I might leave that. I might change that because to go for a more obvious. Here's a Lagavulin 91.
Okay, very nice. All cast strength.
Cast strength at. It just says cast strength. I don't know what the strength is.
Yeah.
So there we go into the glass. Let's try to bung the whole lot in. I've been a bit over generous in my pour, but that was
No
just
such
to
thing.
finish off, tidy up the glass. So the first thing you do. Oh, now the first thing you do. Actually, I haven't demonstrated that. You see these wee bubbles
Yes.
that lurk around.
Yeah.
What I always do, especially when I'm doing blind tastings, is to shake the bottle, the sample bottle, or well, let's have a look at this one. No, that's no good. You see, that. You see, there we are.
Better not show us the label on that one.
A clear bottle, but if you give it a shake,
Yeah.
you see these little bubbles are called beads in the trade or in the old days. And if if you give it a shake blind, you don't know what it is, you don't know what the strength is.
Yes.
And if it shows if it beads, let's try this in the glass. Now you see, where are we?
Yeah.
You see how it's foaming up, not exactly like a pint of Guinness, but look at that, and it's lingering. That is really good beading. Can I show it to you?
Yes, I've seen it there.
I can't. Oh,
That's
God,
like a Coke.
You can't see it. But the beading, in days gone by, it was a very crude way of assessing quality, because the good old boys, they used to know that you do not get a bead under about 50% alcohol. So I'm going to shake this one as I did. This is as I discovered, is 46%. Oh God!
Yeah.
You see, it just fades immediately.
Yes. Yeah.
This blended Scotch that I've got. No, you can't see it.
Yeah, it's gone as well. Yeah.
You see, it just zooms away.
Immediately.
And so the first thing it tells you, if you get a bead that it's likely to be over 50%.
Sure.
Okay, so it's high strength. It's natural strength. That's the first indication. One of the things that I've learned is that if you take new make spirit, which is around say 62% alcohol, and you shake it, it foams up, but then disappears altogether.
Yeah.
And so the lingering bead indicates that this might have a bit of age, even if you've got, you see some whiskies that are at natural strength at say 56% alcohol, and they bead up quite nicely, and the great color, single cask, natural strength, natural color, and but it still disappears quite quickly. Right. And you can tell then that it's still, in spite of the color, because the color comes in early on in maturation.
Sure.
The whiskey hasn't got great age, but you see, what I've learned from that is A, that it's over strength, and B, the fact that the creature is lingering. It's got some bottle age, and this one is 1990, so it's 30 years old.
Yeah.
So that's the first stage, and that's a tip for all of you, which I use, and very few people do use it. But so then you look at the color. Yeah. Now we've got a gorgeous, in this case, a gorgeous deep amber color. It's a polished mahogany. And that implies European oak maturation.
Okay.
At this age, it's probably refill, because most of the whiskey companies in 1990 were filling into refill casks, not many into first fill casks.
Yeah.
Nowadays, there's more. They season and fill into festival casks. But it's it's telling me that it might be European oak casks, because you get this, they're more tannic, or the grain is looser, so the tannins come out, and rather than American oak. I mean, that one that I shook, that's clearly American oak.
Yes.
It's I mean, that's 1990 as well. You see,
right,
that's very interesting.
That's a pure bourbon.
So that's refill American, and this is probably refill European oak, and by European oak, it's probably ex sherry. The ex sherry is irrelevant because it's really the oak type that's the important thing.
Mm-hmm.
So then you nose it for the first time, straight, whatever the strength, and then you think on the physical effect that the liquid is having, the alcohol is having on your nose. So in my case, it's a mellow nose, but it's got a bit of a tweak. It's got a bit of a prickle, which I will probably take off. Well, maybe not. We'll see when we taste it. But see, that's the other thing. Never be shy of adding water. A little bit of water brings up the aroma, and it makes it much, much easier to hold in the mouth when you're tasting.
Yeah.
So then, oh, this is absolutely gorgeous. So then you go to, what am I smelling? And I like to think of like a perfumer in terms of top notes, mid notes, and base notes. Right. So on this case, my top notes are almost like putty, linseed oil.
Yeah.
Linseed oil. That there's a trace of some sort of dark fruits. God, it's not even bramble, because it's quite dry. It's quite dry. I mean, they tend to be tannic, and so this is overall quite tannic.
Yeah.
Nose drying effect. A bit of perseverance. There's some kind of fruit cakey, sort of dried out Christmas cake.
Definitely a sherry cask by the sounds of it.
It sounds like it. Certainly sounds like it. And then the base is, well, both. It's very slightly smoky, and maybe it's wishful thinking, but I would expect Brora to be slightly waxy, like Kleinlich.
All right,
it was part of the characteristic. Now, what I then do before tasting is, if I'm tasting straight, I'll have a sip of water. Coat the palate straight, and then sip, and the wax really comes through. So what I'm looking through here, what I'm looking for, is first the mouthfeel effect, the texture.
Yeah.
This is mouth filling. We talk about creamy. We talk about oily. We talk about whatever. But this is a big whiskey in terms of its texture. It fills the whole mouth. And then I look at what we call the balance of primary tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami.
Yeah.
So when I taste it, I'll hold it in the mouth, and particularly when I've added a drop of water, actually.
Yes.
And then I'll say, now, there's a certain amount of sweetness tends to be picked up towards the front of the tongue.
Sure.
Sweet, sour for sour read acidity, sides of the tongue, saltiness, sides of the tongue, and then bitterness as you swallow.
Right.
And umami is savory, and it's really all over the palate.
Yeah.
So I'm now going to taste it again, and I'm going to hold it for longer and try and identify this so-called balance of primary tastes.
Sure.
Savory overall, very light sweetness, a certain amount of acidity at the sides of the tongue, a certain amount of saltiness, actually, funny enough, very light, certain amount of spice at the back, not a primary taste, and then a certain amount of just a little thread of smoke as you swallow. Again, not a primary taste.
Yeah.
And then this overall teeth coating, you know,
Okay.
this is waxiness, keynote for Brora and Kindlish. Gorgeous, gorgeous. And then you think of the long finish. Well, you measure finishes just short. I mean, short finish is brilliant for the likes of that Rosebank, you know, lowland whiskies or what a aperitif style, you know, Fino sherries. So it's not a criticism at all. But
Tell me,
this has got a long
with the
finish.
regions in Scotland that you have, 5 or 6 regions, I mean, are the boundaries so clearly defined? Or, I mean, for me,
Absolutely not.
there's Islay and non-Islay style of the whiskey, or Campbellton style and not. I mean, are they so different from each other, the different regions, or is that
No.
just origin?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting. The industry wants to get away from the regions.
Yes.
The regions have a long historical provenance. There was an Act of Parliament in 1781 which divided the country broadly between Highland and Lowland,
Yeah.
and for tax reasons.
Yes.
And then by the 1890s, Islay had been distinguished as a different region, as had Campbelltown. And then Speyside was always, which took off in the 1890s. It was always just considered to be part of Highland.
Yeah.
So you had Campbelltown, Islay, Highlands, and Lowlands, and then and Islay. Did I say Islay? Yeah. And then gradually, now, why were they all different? Well, so this was identified by blenders, not by consumers. They didn't sell this idea. They didn't give this idea to consumers until well into the 1980s.
So it was manufactured.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the blenders used to rate by Highland, Lowland, Grain, Islay, Campbelltown, and for their component whiskies, for their blends. But they never shared that with the consumer, you know, because it was all blended whiskey, you know. But then, really, sort of publishers or writers and publishers began to discern the idea. I mean, a real breakthrough was Michael Jackson in his actually the year before, Wallace Milroy. But anyway, Michael Jackson was a real breakthrough. His World Whiskey book, and then his Malt Whiskey Companion.
Yeah.
And he wrote tasting notes and categorized his previous book, the year before, had divided Speyside into various rivers, and so went much more in East Highlands, West Highlands, you know, Aberdeenshire, whatever it was. I mean, there was a historical justification for that, but it was pretty thin. and nowadays the industry wants to get away from all this because they can make, well, not exactly Islay style whiskey, but certainly smoky whiskey, and they do in Bayside or in outside of Islay or Orkney. And so they want to, then what they're trying to do is the industry is trying to do is to say, hey, evaluate it as we're not going to guide you, you what do you smell and taste? But from a layman's perspective, it's quite a useful guide. And the whiskey, of course, all the whiskies from Ireland are not all smoky. I mean, Bunnahabhain and Kirkcaldy are not traditionally smoky. And there are some Speyside whiskies now. Benriach, for example, are producing a smoky Benriach, etc. And the Annandale is producing a smoky version.
I had a Killilla that wasn't peated.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Unusual.
And when Ardbeg was sold to Glenmorangie, they found that the most of the stock, as I remember, most of the stock in the warehouses was called the Kildalton method, non-peated Ardbeg, and the dismay, and they tried to sort of blend it in in the early bottlings after they'd taken over, because they had all this stuff, and so the early bottlings from after Glenmorangie took over were a blend of these so-called non-peated. Actually, even though they were non-peated, they still had a slightly smoky character, but they blended it in with the traditional Islay, the traditional Ardbeg, which was heavily peated. And so what I'm saying is that although there is historical justification for this classification, and although I think it is still useful to consumers, it's by no means set in stone, and you can. And nowadays, with a greater understanding of, well, dare I say it, the chemistry, but you can't. The one thing that has really remains intact is that you cannot precisely replicate a style in one distillery, and even if you build a distillery next door, as they did at Glen Grant, for example, and then the other one was imaginatively called Glen Grant No. 2. It became Capadonic, and it's now been demolished. And
Capadonic,
but they were designed to produce exactly the same spirit, but they didn't. And so there are certain mysteries, if you like. They get pretty close to it. But I'm beginning to haver, as they say in Scotland.
No. Well, one of the questions I have is, obviously you've been down to Dingle actually on a couple of occasions. Peter brought you down to Dingle, and you've been over with the Irish Whisky Society in Dublin, I think, doing a Scotch Malt Whisky Society tasting, and then doing an Irish Whisky Society tasting. What's your perception of Irish whiskey overall, in terms of the product and in terms of the market growth that it's been getting? And last year one of our whiskies won single malt of the year, the Teeling 24-year-old one. What's your thoughts on all that?
Well, I always maintain that you should judge like within like. There's no best whiskey. There's no best whiskey, period.
Sure.
And it's outrageous to compare Irish whiskey with Scotch or with bourbon or with Canadian. or with Japanese. Actually, you could probably compare, Scotch with Japanese to a degree. But it's daft, because these distillers, they all make whiskey as they always, for various reasons, as they're instructed to do, principally by their bosses, as they always have done to some extent. And now with the new distillers, as they want to, which is very interesting, very interesting. But the idea of, I mean, these I judge on many of these competitions.
Yes.
But we are always, it is always divided up, the choice of the best whiskey in the world is an absolute fucking nonsense. It really is a nonsense.
Yeah. It's too personal.
And I think actually it's probably quite political. They probably choose what. Well, I mean,
depending how many seats you buy at the table.
What's that?
Depending how many seats you buy at the table.
Yeah, to some extent. Or hey, we've got to give. I'm not privy to this sort of the decisions that are made, and I know they'll be guided by the nosing panels, but I mean, you've got to. We were chatting very briefly about this earlier on, and
not scoring whiskies. Yeah.
But the not scoring whiskies and and giving respect to the fact, the effort that the distillers make. Now, so these young. I was in Tasmania early last year, and the whiskies are really quite interesting, but they're incredibly young, and they're very, very influenced by. They put them into powerful ex-port, well, they didn't call it port, but or ex-sherry, and they didn't call it sherry, but small export ex-sherry casks, and they bottle and sell, at 3 years old. And I mean, some of them are very nice products, but they lack depth and complexity.
But does complexity and depth only come with age?
Oh man. Yes.
And are depth and complexity, are they the biggest parameters at which you would judge a whiskey by?
No. Because depth and complexity certainly come with age.
Sure.
And that's why Scotland and Ireland, I assume, that there's the similar climates, and long tradition. But it so much depends upon the interaction between the spirit and the wood.
Yeah.
And so long maturation requires tarred wood. I mean, first, second, even second fill for long maturation. Otherwise, you're going to get an extraordinary. I mean, I was lucky with this Brora because the whiskies of that age, they tend to grow into one another. It's very difficult to tell where they've come from.
Yes.
And so what the blenders think of is or indeed what consumers think of is, or connoisseurs think of, is the balance of what they call distillery character and mature character. Mm-hmm. And if you've got a very active cask, so if you were to put this spirit into a first fill cask and leave it for 30 years, it would be utterly dominated by flavors from the wood.
Sure. Yeah.
Not necessarily woody flavors, but you would not be able to distinguish it from any other product from any other distillery. Right. And the desirable thing is to achieve the character, and that Brora has that certainly has done that. It's still got Brora character, even though it's 30 years old. And the but that so the influence of the cask is massive, but it shouldn't. But then the influence of the way the whiskey is made at that particular plant is also because that's the distillery character. You know?
Yeah.
The new make spirit has its own character
Its own
and cannot
fingerprint.
yeah, and it cannot be absolutely replicated, you know, which
And
is
this
wonderful.
notion, like you have some old Scottish distilleries that are being reopened again, and you know they're saying they're going to make it as it was, and it's going to have the same characteristic. I mean, that's not really possible, is it?
I don't think so, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I know they're going to some lengths, but you know, there are certain things which the Scotch whisky industry and indeed the Irish whisky industry, or I don't know about some of the new distilleries, they discount barley varieties. Well, I know that Mark Rainier, for example, at Waterford,
Yes.
he's doing an extraordinary experiment with different. He's passionate about terroir. I mean,
Yes.
terroir is thrown out of the window. I mean, nobody talks about terroir, but he, being a wine man originally,
Yeah.
was very interested in that. And you see, the I've done very few experiments, been able to do very few experiments with new make spirit from different barley varieties. The Scotch whisky industry says the barley variety makes no difference at all because all they want really is the yield, the amount of alcohol per ton. You know.
Yeah. So
And
they come out with a recommendation of what barley to grow that year, just like here.
exactly, and this is makes commercial sense.
Yes.
And so, of course, they would say makes no difference to flavour. You know, and on this particular occasion, it was at Ben Romach Distillery, which had recently been taken over by Gordon MacPhail, the whiskey shop in Elgin, and and I tasted, I think 5 different samples. They did some experimental distillations with different barley varieties. You know, the usual ones in those days were Chariot and Prisma and Ducado and whatever.
Yeah.
I really couldn't tell the difference, nosing these, but there was one that was outstanding, and that was Golden Promise. Golden Promise, and Golden Promise was introduced in 66, I think it was.
We actually we covered heritage grains actually in our last issue, and it's amazing that they've actually been revived from such a low such a low base. You know, from a handful of seed, you know, to fill a whole field. It's incredible, incredible.
And the problem is, of course, that these old varieties, and you can go back beyond GP to Sprat, Archer, and old varieties, yield very low yield of alcohol per ton of
it's terrible
of malt
from a commercial point of view.
But from a commercial point of view, it's disastrous.
Yeah.
But also they become prone to disease, and I think that was one of the reasons why the GP. Well, that's one of the given reasons that why Golden Promise was abandoned.
Yeah.
But a number of the new distilleries in Scotland are planting or paying farmers to plant Golden Promise. And there's no doubt in my mind at all that the spirit from Golden Promise is oily, it's heavier, it's and this is from the same distillery, remember? And but it was distinctive. It was distinctive. And
that's funny enough that you should mention Mark. We've got Mark Rainier on next week, actually. So he will fill us in on his terroir story next week. So that'll be an interesting one. But no, look, I mean, as the neutral spirit, you can taste the difference. But you've got to compare like with likes, and there's a few other anomalies there. So that'll be interesting to see what he says.
But as I understand, Mark is also growing the same barley variety in a number of farms and
yes.
doing separate distillations.
Yeah. Organic
Well,
farmers, biodynamic farmers, different soil conditions. So,
well,
you
I
know,
mean, that will be remarkable if there's a different style of spirit of the same variety from a number of different farms.
yeah,
Of course,
I mean, so
in
far,
those days,
sorry, so far I've tried 3 of his releases, and they were from different farms, but different varieties of grain. So I can't make a comparison really, but it'll be interesting to see. Certainly, the grain produces a different style of new make. I've seen that. But of all the Irish whiskies, I mean, I know Scotch is your speciality, but you obviously tasted world whiskies and Irish whiskies. What's your particular favorite, if you have, or what do you admire and respect about Irish whiskey, if at all? Hopefully you do, or we'll cut you off.
well, I would say just pure pot still.
Yeah.
Pure pot still. Redbreast is my favorite. Probably Redbreast 15. Is it 15 or whatever? If you wanted a favorite one, but generally speaking, green spot, yellow spot, the Middleton. I'm so delighted that Irish distillers have realised that they've got a jewel in this pure pot still style, the traditional style.
Yes,
I think.
Yeah.
And the I mean, I certainly when I'm in Ireland, I like a pint of paddy, a long drink, of course, straightforward Irish whiskey.
I'm
And
looking forward to getting back into the pub.
I have indeed done. I mean, I wouldn't describe it as a very sophisticated whiskey, but I have done tasting notes for a variety of Jameson whiskies, and I mean they're very, very good. But give me the pure pot still, but they've now they call it single pot still or something now, don't they?
That's right.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
is there an equivalent in Scotland?
Well, you see,
there different mash bills with oats, rye.
No, there's no equivalent because.
But historically, was there ever?
For grain whiskey, yeah.
Yeah.
But and in fact, funny enough, I was writing something today. By the strict Scotch definition, malt whiskey has to be made in a pot still from malted barley. Period.
Okay.
Loch Lomond Distillery makes a mash of pure malted barley in a coffee still, continuous still.
Yeah. Okay.
And the SWA told them they could not call it. So it's a grain whiskey. It's superb, by the way, absolutely delicious. Because but they can only call it grain whiskey because it's made in a.
Yeah, well, we had Slane Distillery, and they produce a whiskey in a column still that's just barley, just malt.
Is that right?
And
really?
Yeah, and they can only call it grain whiskey. But that'll be interesting now.
Yeah.
Do you know any of the Scottish that are over here? I mean, we've got quite an influx of famous Scottish people come over. Obviously, Mark we talked about, and Brian Watts is working with Great Northern Distillery, and Graham Cool, you might know, down in Dingle.
Yes. Yes, of course. I met Graham down in Dingle. Yeah.
So, we do get a few Scots all over Ireland as well. So,
well, you draw from the best advice. You see, that's the thing. Experienced distillers, Yeah.
What's your vision? Sorry, one question I meant to ask you as a writer, and I'll loosely put myself in that category. What's your regime for writing continuously and putting up such fine publications and books all the time? I mean, do Do you write when you're inspired, or do you have a regime? You wake up in the morning and you say, right, I'm going to write 500 words and that's it, or?
No, I have to kick myself into action. And
Right.
but no, it's a good question.
Yeah.
I start very early. I get up at 6:30.
Okay.
Where I live in central Edinburgh, I go for a walk to sort of mortify the flesh, sort of gasp around for about an hour, and then I come back and I hit my desk at 7:30. I try to clear my emails. I try to by 8 o'clock, and then I write in the morning. I found that I can work much more efficiently, much more clear headed in the morning.
Yeah.
And then I come and I drink coffee in the morning. I sometimes have a small plate of porridge in the morning before I start, but sometimes not. But I drink a lot of coffee in the morning, and and then come 11 o'clock, I suddenly get itchy. I've had up enough of coffee, and then I have a glass of sherry.
All right. Okay.
Usually dry sherry.
Okay.
Sometimes sort of Amontillado sherry, but
Nice.
and then I carry on, and then at 12 o'clock I'm allowed to give myself a glass of gin, usually gin and tonic, and then I carry on until about 1 o'clock, when I'll make myself a sandwich, and then quite frankly the afternoon, well, I potter around and
Well, you do tasting.
I always do my tasting at 11 o'clock, by the way.
Oh, really?
Very, very important. Very important. If I've got any whiskies to taste, I will start at 11 o'clock. But it's certainly before lunch. And
Okay.
if I'm writing detailed tasting notes, I usually can only cope with two at a time.
Yeah.
So if I'm under pressure, then I have to take a break. If I'm doing just a very simple evaluation rather than detailed tasting notes, then I can look at, say, 6 before lunch. But by and large, the tasting notes usually that I have to write but it's got to be before lunch, when your senses are fresh, because you're not drinking for pleasure.
Yeah.
You're trying to analyze, and so that's that. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's quite important.
And so it's consistently at 11 o'clock you do the tastings. What's
Well,
it like for those of us that never get the chance to try a 70-year-old or a 75-year-old whiskey? What's it like?
Well, the interesting thing is that you address them in exactly the same way as a 5-year-old whiskey or whatever. And in some cases, it's better not to know how old they are. So the tasting notes that I write, and when these people pay me to write tasting notes, I tell them, I will be as objective as I can. I'm not going to write. I'm not going to write. I'm going to try and. Obviously, any tasting note is subjective, but
We've worn the batteries.
but I will try and be as objective as I can, and tasting notes. I do it so much that but my view is only as good as the next guy's, and that's why I never score. I score privately, but I never, and I won't allow people to put I don't put scores up, because I think it's unfair.
But you would have favorites, I assume. If you were to pick out, well, let me put it this way: if you were to pick out your favorite whiskey ever and your most memorable one, because they may and may not be the same thing.
Well, I tell you what, when I'm just drinking for pleasure, as I am now, my bottle here is a blended Scotch, which I was actually involved in putting together. My blended Scotch for the desert island, if perish the thought, I had nothing else to drink, it would be Johnny Walker Black Label. I think it's a magnificent whiskey, absolutely magnificent whiskey. But so blend is my staple, if you like.
Yeah.
Malt is my work. Now, of course, I've been privileged to taste so many fine. One thing I've learned is that, almost, not all, but almost any distillery can produce a really superlative whiskey, and that same distillery can produce a dog. Yeah. So choosing, I couldn't just there are certain, of all the distilleries that makes that I've tasted, there are certain that are more consistent than others, and that I would rate. Mortlach I would rate highly. Lagavulin, Kalila, let me think of others that there's a clutch and then there are others you see which are superb. Highland Park. I mean, some Highland Parks are just superb. But some are really rather inferior, quite frankly. Glenrothes, some are really, really excellent, and some are not quite so good. You know what I mean? In my view,
the standards vary year to year as well on some of those. I mean, I'm not going to mention any names, but I mean, as in Ireland, I'm sure is the case. As in Scotland, from year to year, they can vary in quality.
Well, I think, there's two reasons for that. The first, there's several reasons, but there's a phenomenon called flavor drift.
Yeah.
Whereby if the blender or and when I say blender, I mean in terms of choosing casks to create a consistent. The industry, the Scotch whisky industry, has long been obsessed by consistency, and probably that was in reaction to the fact that Irish whisky was considered much more consistent in the 19th century and actually into the 20th century.
Yes.
And so it was when I mean, there are numerous accounts of people ordering, whiskey, and they would order Irish because they knew what they were going to get, and but and when they ordered the Scotch, they didn't know what they were going to get. They didn't, and then the blending, of course, developed a consistency of flavor, and by design, repeated, because you can, as I always say, you can't brand unless you can blend. Only with blending, and whether it's blending tea or coffee or malt whiskey, single malt whiskey, or blended malt whiskey as they call it now, or indeed blended whiskey, the consistency you can brand now. So having established that, then is this from the blenders have an extraordinarily difficult task, because they've got to consider their key role is to keep that blend consistent. That's the key role. Even consistent flavor.
It's a double-edged sword, though. It's a double-edged sword, keeping consistency in one sense, in that you can be seen as being monotonous, perhaps.
Well, but then you see your loyal consumers want the whiskey that especially particularly blended Scotch. I mean, I'm really talking about in terms of the consistency. I think that to a degree with malt whiskey, although one of the rules we touched on the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and they of course made a virtue for the first time of inconsistency, exploring the difference between one cask and another, and which is celebrated by their members and is now, acknowledged by connoisseurs that there will be differences in bottlings, differences in
the growth in these single cask collections and the interest in them, has taken off lately as well. So people like the idiosyncrasies, I think, of the different batches and the different years.
Yes, they do. But some, of course, are not nearly as good as others. And
that's true. Very true.
You can find, younger whiskies or whatever, which it's all to do with the casks. It's all to do with the casks, and to do with the cask selection.
If there was a new distillery on the horizon, whether it be in Scotland or elsewhere, to watch out for, one that's really impressed you, what would that be? Who would it be?
Well, it's difficult for me to say that, but I'm slightly involved, or I was advising Ardnamurchan Distillery on the Ardnamurchan Peninsula.
Okay.
And I have been hugely impressed by the spirit. I think they're about to bottle. I think it's 3 years old, maybe even 4 years old this year, and so they're about to release. But some of the spirit releases have been very, very impressive.
Yeah.
But really my only contribution there was to introduce them to Dr. Jim Swan, who was a legend.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Legend. Yeah.
And really his advice, well, they interesting enough, they took his advice and then they changed it very slightly. But he was a genius. He was my mentor in
a huge influence here, of course, as well.
Training course. Sorry?
Huge influence in Ireland as well.
Absolutely. And in Taiwan and all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, he was an absolutely brilliant guy, and it's just a charming guy. Yeah. And so they took his advice and they did and then they wanted to extend it a little bit here and a little bit there, and but anyway, all I can say that the other one I would mention is a new distillery is King's Barnes, and I think Jim. I think he advised King's Barnes. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But there's some of these guys, they start with the best will in the world, and the Glasgow distillery. Now they had, so far as I understand, they had no advice at all. But maybe entirely wrong. But they were experienced distillers, and and they're producing a nice whiskey now. But I think that the difficulty is going to be the when they're all fighting in the marketplace in, let's say, from now on 4 or 5 years hence, points of difference, the points of difference in flavor and any other claims they can make, because in the Anthony Wills, I mean, for example, the Kilchoman, which again on Isla, which I have high regard for, the Anthony, who's a dear friend, and but I remember he talking at an event, and he said it's all very well, sort of advising new people who want to set up. So he said it's all very well. You can raise, say, between £5 and £10 million to build a distillery. Fine. Then you've got to sustain the production for, let's say, well, certainly 3 years, and maybe
absolute minimum,
5 or 10, and that's costing you, let's say, £2,000 a day, and depending on the size of the distillery.
Sure.
But with all your incoming, all your and staff and energy and so on, and you've got this you really your income is from your distillery shop on a distillery which you're not selling any of your
Or
whiskey.
from tourism.
Or from, yeah. But then he said the real ball breaker is distribution.
Yeah.
That is the killer, And it's not only the cost of bottling, labeling, etc., promotion, etc., but finding the right distributor who will do a good job.
Yeah.
And what is going to happen is that the distributors, you see, they then will sell to the on trade and the off trade, but they'll sell into the off trade. So they go to a retailer and they say, "Hey, we've got this brilliant new whiskey," and then the retailer will say, "Well, now we're rammed with whiskies. In order to put your whiskey on the shelf, we've got to take another one off." A well-known whiskey. Sorry, my phone's buzzing. Just sort of turn it off. And then it comes back to the state. Will the customer buy the second bottle? It's going to be a very crowded marketplace.
I think so as well. I mean, there's an awful lot of there competing, and if the market itself doesn't grow, obviously, they're all banking on the market growing. I think it will. I think the overall market will grow.
Well, I think that the hope is that we really are talking about a global market now.
Yes.
And if one market closes down or becomes more tiresome for one reason or another, then there's another one opening up in Brazil. Or if they change, Diageo are doing an awful lot of work in generic whiskey promotion in China. China's the big hope, and the India, of course, second. But then the Indian regulations are just. Sorry, can I just take this very, very quickly?
Please do, yeah. Just a reminder that we're going to be announcing the winner of our Belfast Week competition here, and you bear with us another few minutes.
I'm on a Zoom call.
Can you let us in, please?
Oh, sorry. Oh God. No,
Go for it, Charles.
I'll need to come down to the door. Hold on, I will do.
Thanks, sir.
Can you bear with me 1 second? My boys are at the door and they can't get in.
Let them in.
I'll be back in 1 second.
Sure. So while Charles goes off to let his son into his house, we're probably gone well beyond what we normally go on our posts. If you have any questions that you want to ask, please post them. I see there's a few questions in. Normally we run for an hour. We seem to be an hour and a half at this point, but hopefully you're enjoying what Charlie has to share with us. He's a fountain of knowledge and really an insight that we wouldn't normally get. So as I said, next week we're lucky we have Mark Rainier from Waterford Distillery joining us. So if you have any questions for next week, please send them in and put them on our post when we put them on our social media, and we'll be looking at his whiskey and we'll be asking him any questions. Presumably people have questions about terroir, and they've actually had a chance to try the release he's had this week. And then we'll also, well, let's see, we had, I'm going to share the screen in terms of the competition as well. So we had a lot of entries in for the amazing Belfast Whisky Week, and just to show the transparency, how we actually pick a winner. So we assign a random number to every entry, and then we will sort them by that random number, ascending or descending, and we will ask Charles to pick a number and we will get the winner that way. So if you are waiting on that. Over 230 whiskies. We'll ask Charles to pick a winner and an amazing prize.
I can't get my boombox.
And I think I can hear Charlie coming back now.
I'm back.
I can hear you.
Here we are.
Hello.
I've taken my jacket off.
Well, you're dead right.
Stripped for action.
Charles, I was saying to our readers that and our listeners that we normally go on for an hour, and I could talk to you for hours. There's a couple more questions I'd love to ask you actually. Just very briefly, most influential writer for you?
I would have to say Michael Jackson.
Okay. Great voice.
But going back, as I mentioned to you earlier on today, Inez MacDonald. I'll just check the title. Yeah, it's simply Whisky.
Yeah,
that's the most recent edition. It's quite a thin book. 1930. That would be my my desert island book. If I had only one whiskey book to take to a desert island, it would be Inez MacDonald. It's a wonderful. It's a polemic. It's a savaging attack on the whiskey industry.
Based on your recommendation, I put it into my basket on Amazon for
good
purchase
man.
later.
Good man. Yeah.
Okay. The other thing we have, and I'm sure you would be envious of this, is we had a competition running during the last week and a half for Belfast Whisky Week. And there's 42 different events. It's a festival of whiskey, not only Irish, but predominantly Irish, with 42 different events. And so Paul O'Cahan has generously put together a package with over 230 samples. That would keep you busy for a while. And basically, I'm going to share the screen and show the spreadsheet. So I have a spreadsheet. Let me see. Let me find it. Share screen. Okay, so I hope you can all see that. I have a spreadsheet there. There's 595 entries. I'm going to sort them by this random number. And I would do it by the random number since I said I would do that. Charles, can you do me a favor and pick a random number for us between 2 and 596?
95.
95. Okay, let's see who 95 is. So, Martin McKenna is in row 95, and he is the lucky winner. He posted, I believe, on Twitter, and he has only 230 whiskies to go through. So we'll be in touch with Martin. Congratulations, actually. A level of transparency there, just to show that we're not trying to pick the cheapest place to post to. And Martin will be drunk for the next year. Obviously no liability, but congratulations to Martin. It's a fantastic prize. 42 different brands, 230 different whiskies, and good luck to him. We'll get those out to him as soon as possible. Charles, we've kept you well beyond normal time. I could talk to you for hours. You've been a fantastic guest.
It's been a great pleasure, I tell you. It's been
we're really looking forward to you coming over again, or we will somehow make our way over there. But seeing as you've written a book on toasts, perhaps you might like to end the show with giving us a favorite toast of your own.
Well,
one that we can not offend anyone.
Well, I'm afraid that the toast that I would give you would be offend. I'll find my wee book. Where is it gone? Well done. That's
That's the
my.
book.
Is that the one?
Yes,
And
but I saw it in French.
I haven't got any royalties from the French one.
Hmm.
But my favorite, it's not really a toast, but it's a very, very touching. It's a Burns. I'll need to just have a quick look and see if I can find it, in case I forget it. Where are we? Yeah. Well, I can't find it in the book, but Robert Burns made a lovely, lovely toast, which it's also quite solemn. You know, he said, "Here's a bottle and an honest man. What would you wish for mair, man? Wha kens afore his life may end, what his share o' care may be, man. So catch the moment as they fly, and use them as you ought, man. Believe me, happiness is shy, and comes not I when caught, man."
Oh, beautiful. Fantastic.
Is that all right?
Fantastic. That's a lovely way to end. I mean,
Catch the
I'll give you
moments as they
ours,
fly.
an Irish one, and may you live as long as you want and never want as long as you live.
Splendid.
Charles,
God
it's
bless
been
you.
a real privilege, a real honor. We're
God, we've
thrilled
gone
to
on
have
quite
you
long.
join us. Thank you so much, and we will be in touch. And God bless. Stay safe.
Keep in touch, Sergio.
Slàinte.
Lovely, Sláinte.
Thank you very much. So that's it. I mean, we could have talked for hours. Charlie's just a fascinating character and fantastic to listen to. I really enjoyed the show this evening. I'm sorry if we've kept you late, but I'm hoping you feel that it was worth it. Look, congratulations to Martin. That's a fantastic prize. And next week, as I mentioned, we've Mark Rainier in episode 6. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Terroir is very topical. The Waterford whiskey is just out. He's a colourful, enigmatic personality, and look forward to speak to him next week. If you have questions, as I said, thank you very much. Thank you very much for bearing with us this week. As I said, it's our pleasure to be able to present this. It's brought to you by Irish Whiskey Magazine. We'd love your support and your readership, and any feedback you have would be very, very welcome. So with that, Slàinte, good evening, and take care. See you next week.